Hi. Just taking a moment to get in touch with my own vulnerability. Today is National Coming Out Day, and in celebration of all of those who have ever come out, who have yet to come out, who are just now coming out, I thought I'd share my own, some window into my own coming out, or many comings out, continuing to come out. My name is Artemisia, and those of you who know me know that I am queer and polyamorous. And I first came out as you know, and it's funny because I'm struggling with the words, because it wasn't until very recently that I've even been willing to call myself queer. So when I first came out, I didn't have a name for myself other than I'm an Artemisia, and I love people regardless of their anatomy. What I find the most appealing, attractive, life-affirming, and inspiring about a person has nothing to do with their plumbing. So I just love who I love, and that's always been true in theory. But the first time I really kind of owned that in myself in a way that allowed myself to be seen was in 2009, I would imagine. Yeah, my son was about 7 years old, and I had a very dear friend who was female-bodied, and spent a lot of time with her and traveled with her. And I had a moment where I was coming to visit my family, and she was coming with me, and I kind of been realizing that I had fallen in love with her, and we had this really deep, rich, sweet depth of connection, and I was unclear whether or not that was a romantic connection or what was happening there. And as I was still exploring within myself whether or not I wanted to explore that avenue of interaction with her, I was bringing her to my family. And the first piece for me, in order to feel really safe being seen in my love for her, was to let my family know. So I remember the first person I called was my dad, and I told him that I was coming down to Los Angeles, and I was bringing this girlfriend of mine who I was in love with. And my family was going to meet her, and I didn't know where I was going with that relationship, but that she was very beloved to me. And I remember the first thing he said was, that he loved me and that he just wanted me to be happy. And his experience of, love relationships felt sort of, I'm struggling with this. It's like telling my story and telling someone else's story feels sort of unfair to the other person. But I will just share that my dad was really affirming and just had some things to say about his own sense of not feeling connected and happy in his love life, and wanting me to have the gift of that. And so if I love somebody, he wanted to celebrate that regardless of their anatomy or my orientation. Next, I called my brother, and I told my brother, and he said, "Oh, that's great. So anyways, for Christmas, we're doing this, this, and this." So it kind of was just like a non-event, not an issue, but we didn't really talk about it, and we moved on to other things. The last person I called was my mom, and the first thing she said to me was, "Oh, well, you better not tell your dad or your brother." Which was interesting, because I called them first, and I got such a warm reception from my dad, and non-event reaction from my brother. And so that was kind of like me slowly coming out piece by piece. And over the years, I've, been more open about me just loving who I love regardless of anatomy. But that was the first me like really coming out to the most scariest piece, was like being seen by my family. And in terms of coming out as polyamorous, it felt like that was like a second coming out, in that, I wasn't forward facing with my family. There were people in my life who knew, and when I dated folk, I was always sort of like unpacking monogamy with monogamous folk, and once I was like in and connected and in the juiciness, then I would spend a lot of time unpacking monogamy and kind of proposing that I be accepted for this way that I love. And there came a point where I was no longer willing to apologize or hide. And I was dating a creature who I was really struggling with my metamor relationship. Some of the metamor is the term for your lover's lover. And I was in some pain around a conflict that was happening between some of my beloved's metamors and I was over at my brother's house and washing dishes with my sister-in-law, and I remember just deciding to openly tell her what was going on in my life. She had met my partner at the time. They had come to, my family's house many times, and they knew that that person and I were in a deep love relationship, but they weren't aware that that person had other lovers, that that person lived with someone else, And so I just started openly talking about my relationships and some of the things I struggle with and the challenges I was having in my metamor relationships. I remember her just kind of being like, whoa, like, whew, and the next day saying, I was having nightmares about you last night. I don't know how you navigate, but it was more coming from a place of concern for me and what I was navigating in my relational field, which was so foreign to her, and not a place of like, oh, you have multiple partners and your partners have other partners themselves. There was just some sort of like, not necessarily unpacking that, but just like there was a way that I was like, this is how I am, and we just kind of danced, and there was a point where I just wasn't willing to hide anymore. And what inspired me to come out so fully, where I no longer like, I'm just poly everywhere I go. I'm not worried about the impact on my professional relationships or on my professional reputation or my standing in the world, is 2 years ago, I was at a Nonviolent Leadership for Social Justice retreat, and there was someone who identified as queer, and there were different caucuses representing marginalized communities, and this person was requesting my support in getting the leadership team to support having a queer caucus. And in service to supporting them in having space for talking about the ways in which heteronormativity impacts queer folk, I was willing to stand on the panel of people who identified as queer. And up until that point, this was kind of like a shadow identity. It was like like I just explained away, like, oh, individual people I love, who cares about their anatomy? This is like an idea in the world. And oh, there's people I've slept with that are male-bodied or are female-bodied. But to stand in front of an entire room of people, some of which I barely knew, and identify myself as queer was terrifying. And I didn't realize how scared I was until that moment when I stood up in support of this person. And I realized, oh, this is for me. This is me coming out for me. And up until that point, that I had this sweetie that I had dated for a couple years, and they regularly called me queer. And I didn't identify that way. Again, I was just like, I'm an Artemisia. Don't put me in a box, And I thought that was a part of my liberation and freedom, to not want to be contained by a label, but really it was some internalized homophobia and biphobia that kept me from naming the fact that I love people regardless of form. And some of the people that I love are female-bodied, and some of the people I love are trans. And to hide behind I love who I love without wanting to adopt a label was one way that I was protecting myself from the judgments and the backlash or the consequences of being seen as queer. So it was only maybe 2 years ago that I was forward everywhere in the world, unapologetically and all the fucking time. And so it's been like sort of a slow coming out. I didn't have like a one day I'm telling everyone and we're clear. It's like there's just little trickles over the last 15 years to 2 years to 9 years, depending on your timetable and the different events. And so I just feel grateful to be sitting in a body right now that has the capacity to love so deeply, and the courage and the freedom to respect, honor, and attend to the way I love as a gift and offer that to the world, and to have the kind of quality of care and community in my life and the level of resource and resiliency to let myself be seen. And so happy coming out day to all of you that are just recently coming out, who are considering coming out, or who have come out. I love you and I respect you, and visibility breeds acceptance.